funding runs out at midnight on Friday. Will there or won't there be a shutdown? Mixed messages from Capitol Hill about a possible funding deal. But will the White House stand firm in its demand for billions of dollars for a border wall? A live report on where everything stands at this hour coming up. And the judge who ruled Obamacare unconstitutional tonight, even some Republicans don't think the Texas judge's reasoning will hold up as the case goes on appeal. We'll break down exactly what that ruling means and ask our legal eagles what they think about the chances it goes all the way to the Supreme Court. And a defiant, fired FBI director behind closed doors on Capitol Hill again today. He then came out swinging. Our own chief intelligence correspondent Catherine Herridge face to face, challenging James Comey. She's got all the details coming up. Hello and welcome to Fox News at Night. I'm Shannon Bream in Washington. We begin tonight with correspondent Kristen Fisher and what she's hearing about the status of a possible government shutdown. We're 4 days away. Good evening, Kristen.
Hey, Shannon. Well, there was a moment this afternoon where it seemed like maybe a compromise was in sight. But the day ended with almost zero progress. In fact, a senior Senate Republican source said, "We're as unsettled as we have been for some time." Not a single Republican senator walking into their weekly leadership meeting tonight said that they knew anything about a specific plausible proposal that would actually keep the government from partially shutting down on Friday.
There's all talk right now, but nothing for sure. Nothing for sure. Just waiting.
If anything happened in the last 3 days, I don't know about it.
I don't know. If the White House has a plan, they're keeping it to themselves. There's no way that Mrs. Pelosi is going to agree to a single solitary dime for a border wall because she wants to be Speaker.
When Senator Schumer and Congresswoman Pelosi met with President Trump in the Oval Office last week, they put two options on the table that they claim could pass both the House and the Senate: a one-year continuing resolution for all 7 outstanding appropriations bills, or pass 6 appropriations bills plus a one-year continuing resolution for Homeland Security. And that would include $1.3 billion for a fence, but not a concrete wall.
President Trump should support one of these options and spare innocent, hardworking Americans the pain of an unnecessary Trump shutdown. His temper tantrum will get him a shutdown, but it will not get him the wall. It's futile.
But Senate Democrats say they have not heard a peep, that's a direct quote, from the White House or from their Republican colleagues about those two options. President Trump doesn't like them because neither proposal contains the $5 billion he's demanding for his border wall, and he said last week that he'd be proud to shut the government down in the fight for his wall. And while he may not be giving any guidance to Democrats or Republicans about how to avoid a shutdown, the president is keeping his fight front and center on Twitter. Quote, "Anytime you hear a Democrat saying that you can have good border security without a wall, write them off as just another politician following the party line." Now, if the government does partially shut down, it would impact about 800,000 government employees just 4 days before Christmas. It's a big deal, but these shutdown standoffs have almost become routine. This time, though, and I want to quote my colleague Chad Pergram here, what's surprising about this potential government shutdown crisis is the silence, the dearth of information, the lack of panic and anxiety. He attributes it to lawmakers wanting to push President Trump right up until the deadline in an attempt to force the president to take it or leave it, whatever the it may ultimately be, Shannon.
And that is the question. All right, Kristen Fisher, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Federal judge taking the government to task in the Michael Flynn case. Judge Emmett Sullivan getting new information tonight from the special counsel on exactly how the FBI went about interviewing Flynn and what they learned. Prosecutors providing a new memo to the judge tonight about the interview with the former national security advisor that ultimately led to his guilty plea for lying to investigators. Also tonight, former FBI Director James Comey testifying in Congress again about the alleged bias at the DOJ. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge following it every step of the way.
Shannon, after the closed-door session, the former FBI Director James Comey spoke briefly with reporters, and he took none of the blame for damage to the Bureau's credibility.
The FBI's reputation has taken a big hit because the President of the United States, with his acolytes, has lied about it constantly. But that damage has nothing to do with me.
Comey stood by the FBI interview of former National Security Advisor Mike Flynn, though critics emphasized Flynn was discouraged from having a lawyer and was not warned that any false statements could be prosecuted. Comey declined to answer Fox's questions about whether he mishandled classified information when he shared with his lawyers memos documenting his conversations with the president.
That's nonsense. I'm very proud of the way the FBI conducted itself.
Heading into the nearly 6-hour session behind closed doors, House Republicans were focused on Flynn.
For him, it's all about Jim Comey. And he thinks the rules don't apply to him.
Late Friday, the FBI released this heavily redacted memo used by Comey to brief incoming President Trump about the anti-Trump dossier, the DNC and Clinton campaign-funded opposition research. The FBI memos described them as, quote, private clients.
He seemed to indicate the other day that he wasn't aware of that until he read reports long after he was gone. I find that very hard to substantiate based on other evidence.
On Fox News, the president's personal attorney said his client's written answers for Robert Mueller are sufficient.
Is the special counsel, does he want to interview the president?
Over my dead body. I am disgusted with the tactics they have used in this case.
The president's weekend attacks on the FBI Michael Cohen investigation, calling his former personal attorney a rat, and the legality of a Cohen search warrant are cited by Democrats as more evidence that the Mueller probe needs protection from Republicans.
They seem to be wanting to play defense counsel for the president.
The Republicans will continue to rake Jim Comey over the coals for as long as they can. And it appears to be at the direction of President Trump.
The Comey transcript from today's closed-door session should be public as early as Tuesday. Shannon?
That will tell us a lot. Catherine Herridge, thank you very much. The new filing tonight on Michael Flynn begins with this fact. It was now fired FBI agent Peter Strzok who interviewed the former NSA advisor. So let's bring in tonight's Legal Eagles National Security Attorney Bradley Moss and the former national spokesperson for the FBI, John Iannarelli. Great to see you both tonight, gentlemen.
Good evening. Thank you.
All right, John, I want to start with you because the judge in this case had wanted all the documents. He put out an order late last week saying, I want to see everything that you have. Apparently, there was still some back and forth going on about these initial notes from the FBI about that interview with Flynn in January of 2017. So tonight we get a look, very redacted. But I was struck by in reading it that Flynn was very kind of equivocal and non-committal about a lot of his answers, saying, I don't remember, I'm not sure, that could have been. Do you think that the fact that he wasn't so blatantly adhering to things that later turned out to be true is part of the reason we didn't get it right away? John?
I'm not sure that we didn't get it for that reason. I think the FBI is trying to hold everything close to the vest until it's time for the actual hearing. What I see, though, in looking at these documents, there's references to Flynn saying things like, good reminder. To me, those are indications of somebody who's trying to tell the truth and is being encouraged to do so by them providing him with information he hadn't thought of.
Well, and to this point about whether or not the Flynn interview was unusual in any way, we would expect somebody at his level of experience and all of the background that he had would know you're not supposed to lie to federal agents. But it's interesting to find out that they intentionally decided they were not going to remind him or warn him about that, Bradley. And also the fact that last week the former FBI director James Comey says we essentially got away with something because we went over there. This was a fresh new administration. We told him he didn't need an attorney. He decided not to. You know that's going to give ammunition to the critics who say the fix was in.
I'm sure for a political narrative, I'm sure it gives some ammunition. But let's be clear here. When Andrew McCabe talked to Michael Flynn, he mentioned the idea of bringing an attorney. He mentioned the context of what the discussion was going to be about in terms of the recent media reports about the contacts with Kislyak, the Russian ambassador. It was very natural. It would have been normal for a competent national security advisor to say, look, I'm now the national security advisor. I have to protect the institution of the White House and the NSC. I should have White House counsel present. Flynn said, no, I don't need it. They show up. They ran through a standard interview. I'm reading through this 302, and it's everything I've seen in every interview I've had of a client sitting with the FBI. They did the basic stuff. Someone of Michael Flynn's stature, of his seniority, of his experience, should have known how this process played out. He's not a junior intern.
Well, and John, it was clear that they noted in some of these documents in the case that he viewed them as, quote, allies. It was clear that he was relaxed, that he was having a conversation with them. He was not guarded at all, which clearly is the purpose. That's how you want a subject to be interviewed. But does it suggest to you that he was sort of lulled into being just a little bit too comfortable with these agents?
There's nothing about this interview that strikes me as the typical FBI interview. First of all, Peter Strzok was a deputy assistant director at the FBI. Deputy assistant directors don't conduct interviews. Special agents, street agents conduct interviews, even at that level. I've interviewed very high-level people myself. That shows me that they were dealing with this outside the norm of FBI procedure.
All right, I want to touch on Jim Comey being on the Hill today. Our Catherine Herridge had a chance to meet up with him. Here is a little bit of their interchange.
The FBI's reputation has taken a big hit over the last year. Do you share any of the responsibility for that?
No. The FBI's reputation has taken a big hit because the President of the United States, with his acolytes, has lied about it constantly.
Riley, how much of that do you think is fully the president's fault? And the fact that, listen, both Democrats and Republicans have been furious at Comey at some point over the last year or two?
Yeah, I mean, look, certainly especially with James Comey, there were plenty of reasons to criticize him, whether you were a liberal, a conservative, a Republican, or a Democrat. But what I think the former director was getting at in particular was what we've seen over the last 2 years of every aspect of law enforcement. Every aspect of this FBI investigation has become politicized by the president with his morning tweets. He's gone after Andrew McCabe, got him pushed out. He went after Peter Strzok. Look, this is a simple process. We run these investigations all the time. This doesn't have to be this hard. It doesn't have to be this vitriolic, but the president can't stand that his Justice Department is still inquiring into this probe, and he can't stand that they were able to convict his former lawyer of committing felonies.
Yeah, and it's clear that this administration doesn't trust a lot of these agencies because they look back to the Carter Page and FISA warrants and applications and still have a lot of questions there. Of course, the president can declassify a lot of that, and if he does, then maybe all of us will have more answers. In the meantime, Bradley and John, thank you both very much.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
All right, the judge who declared Obamacare unconstitutional late Friday now has another Obamacare hearing coming up. This one has to do with the Obama administration's policy seeking to extend protections under the Affordable Care Act to transgender health and abortion-related services. So Trace Gallagher's digging in. He's on the case for us tonight. Hey, Trace.
Good evening, Shannon. We have a good roadmap, a legal roadmap of where District Judge Reed O'Connor stands on federal transgender health protections, because almost exactly 2 years ago, Judge O'Connor halted those protections, saying that forcing doctors to perform transgender surgery could violate their religious freedom. An appeals court later stayed the judge's ruling, but it will come up again on February 4th. And that's not Judge O'Connor's only controversial Obamacare ruling. In August 2016, the judge, appointed by George W. Bush, also blocked an Obama administration order allowing transgender students to use the bathrooms of their choice. Meantime, Judge O'Connor's ruling is getting hammered by Obamacare supporters and opponents alike. University of Michigan law professor Nicholas Bagley, who supports the Affordable Care Act, calls Judge O'Connor's decision frivolous, saying, quoting, "I think the judge's opinion is about as naked a piece of judicial activism as I have ever seen. I don't even think it's close." Jonathan Adler, a conservative law professor at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, called the ruling, quote, "simply nonsensical, hard to justify, and surprisingly weak." Legal experts also noted the Supreme Court, where the case could be headed, has historically been reluctant to strike down federal laws that have become ingrained in the lives of millions of citizens. And today, the Wall Street Journal editorial board published an op-ed titled "Texas Obamacare Blunder," saying, quoting again, "No one opposes Obamacare more than we do, and Democrats are now confirming that it was designed as a way station to government-run health care, but a federal judge's ruling Friday that the law is unconstitutional is likely to be overturned on appeal and may boomerang politically on Republicans." Finally, California Attorney General Javier Becerra is vowing to fight Judge O'Connor's ruling, saying, quote, "The courts essentially left it to the Trump administration and states to decide how to respond, and with the health of millions of people at risk, we won't stand for this backwards and dangerous determination." We should note the 5 Supreme Court justices who voted to uphold the Affordable Care Act in 2012 are still on the court. Shannon.
Yes, they are. Trace Gallagher, thank you very much. Okay, let's bring in the attorney who argued against Obamacare on behalf of Texas and scored that big win on Friday, Robert Hennicky, and former Deputy Assistant Attorney General John Yoo. Welcome to both of you.
Shannon, hi. Thanks for having me on the program.
Okay, so let's play a little bit of bipartisan reaction to that ruling. This is the Senate's top Democrat and also Republican Susan Collins.
It's an awful, awful ruling. We're going to fight this tooth and nail. And the first thing we're going to do when we get back there in the Senate is put a vote on the floor urging an intervention in the case.
I think this will be overturned on appeal.
You do?
I do.
Okay, Robert, let's talk about that, because first this goes to the Fifth Circuit, which is viewed as generally middle of the road, maybe leaning conservative a little bit, and maybe all the way to the Supreme Court. What do you make of the prognostications on both sides of the aisle that it won't stand up?
Well, the critics are wrong. Federal District Judge Reed O'Connor got it right. He got it right because he followed the statute, the text of the Affordable Care Act. He followed the language of the Supreme Court when it ruled Obamacare could only be constitutional because the tax penalty generated revenue for the federal government. Now that that penalty has been zeroed out, the individual mandate, which has always been recognized to be unconstitutional in the abstract, remains. It was right for the judge to recognize that, and it was also right for the judge to strike down the entirety of the act, because it would have been judicial activism for him to just cherry pick bits and pieces of the act that he wanted to keep or set aside. That's not his job. He did his job. Now the case moves forward.
Okay, and to remind folks, back in 2012, when the Supreme Court upheld the Affordable Care Act, it did so finding the individual mandate to be a tax. So in the tax law last year, it was zeroed out. It is to zero. It still exists, but, you know, this judge essentially saying at that point, it really cannot, the rest of the law can't hold up. So there's this question about severability, where you keep the parts of the law that can survive and get rid of those that can't. This is part of Judge O'Connor's decision. He says Congress stated many times unequivocally through enacted text signed by the president that the individual mandate is essential to the ACA, because rewriting the ACA without its essential features beyond the power of an Article III court, as Robert just said, the court thus adheres to Congress's textually expressed intent and binding Supreme Court precedent to find the individual mandate is inseverable from the ACA's remaining provisions. John?
First, I think the court did get it right on the individual mandate. It is unconstitutional because it was based on the tax power, and that's gone now. The tax has been zeroed out, as you said, Shannon. Severability is very difficult. I have a lot of sympathy for the idea that the whole law would fall because the individual mandate is now unconstitutional. It's so intertwined in the law, and Congress may not have intended it to be struck out as a piece and keep everything else. The problem is that in 2012, when this case went to the Supreme Court, that view that the whole law should be struck down was held by the four dissenters, Kennedy, Thomas, and Alito, and Scalia. That means, I think, that it's likely to fail on appeal because the five, as you said in the report, four of the justices, actually the five justices in the majority who upheld Obamacare and rejected this severability argument are still there on the court. Unfortunately, I think Chief Justice Roberts is probably likely to avoid wanting to make a sweeping decision striking down the whole law, which led him to uphold Obamacare twice, to the disappointment of me and many other conservatives.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so a number of groups are weighing in. Of course, Democrats, no surprise, but outside groups too. The president of Planned Parenthood saying this would take away health care from millions and is a direct attack on anyone who can't afford basic health care. This would especially harm those who already face systemic barriers to care, like people with low income, people of color, people living in rural areas, and immigrant communities. So, Robert, what do you make of that criticism? Does it change your feeling that the law needs to go as it stands?
Well, there needs to be parallel paths, and that criticism is misplaced. Let's recognize that Obamacare has failed. You've had 200% increase in premiums. You've had millions of people who have lost their health insurance because they can't afford it. You have people who have lost their doctors because it won't be covered by one of these Obamacare type plans. The system is crumbling. It was doing so long before this ruling. But while the case works its way through the appellate courts, I think the important pivot point is to now pivot to get the policy right. And we need to not look to Washington, D.C. to be the solution on this. Instead, we need to look to the states. We need to look to the states to stand up and use market-based solutions to make sure that those who are sick can get care, can afford care, and can get that care from the doctors that they choose. Let's look for the right solutions, not just the partisan rhetoric, and recognize that Obamacare has failed. We need to find a path forward, and that's going to be from state leadership.
All right, John, quick final word to you.
I couldn't agree more with the policy objections to the law. The problem is those decisions should be in the hands of Congress. And I don't expect in the next 2 years a Democratic House and a Republican Senate are going to be able to pass anything with Obamacare, which unfortunately kicks the football into the arena of the courts, the last institution, I think, that should be making decisions on how health care should look. And the other thing we are overlooking is also puts in the hands of the executive branch agencies. President Trump and his Secretary of Health and Human Services, Alex Azar, have a lot of discretion to shape how the health care system is going to work for the next 2 years.
That makes a lot of folks uncomfortable, and this kicks this also into the 2020 election, so we will see. Robert and John, thank you both very much.
Shannon, thanks so much.
A group of Democratic lawmakers heading to the border tomorrow to investigate the circumstances surrounding a 7-year-old migrant girl's death. 2020 hopeful Beto O'Rourke was already at the Texas border this weekend visiting a child detention center, saying he wants it shut down for good. Well, the Lieutenant Governor of Texas, Dan Patrick, is here to weigh in on all these tidbits on immigration after the break. Hopeful Beto O'Rourke is urging the public to keep the pressure on the Trump administration. He wants to see detention centers for immigrant children here illegally, like the one he toured this weekend in Texas, closed for good.
This facility is open because this administration has decided that those family members who could sponsor these kids are going through onerous background checks, which have produced 170 apprehensions.
Another group of Democrats from the Congressional Hispanic Caucus is going to visit and investigate a Border Patrol station in New Mexico tomorrow, where a 7-year-old girl crossed into the U.S. before she died a day later in an El Paso Children's Hospital. Lieutenant Governor of Texas, Dan Patrick, is here to weigh in. Lieutenant Governor, good to have you with us.
Great to be with you.
That is a case that bothers everyone across the board, but there has been a lot of misinformation about that case, too.
Those cases do tug at all of our heartstrings when that happens, but none of this should be happening. The inaction by Mexico, the inaction by Republicans and Democrats in Washington of not securing the border and not following the president's agenda of building a wall is part of all of this. I'm not blaming any one person, but this is what happens when you have chaos on the border. And, you know, I look at Beto, who is such a lightweight on every issue. He always says something generic, but he never has a specific solution. He didn't complain when we had 2,000 kids at Fort Bliss under Obama. What would he do with those 2,700 people that are there? Shannon, we cannot educate, medicate, and incarcerate the entire world. In Texas alone, we spend about $1 billion a year in border security that we shouldn't have to spend. Our education costs are through the roof because about 1 out of every 5 children are not proficient in English. When you have students who don't speak English and you have, we don't have enough English-speaking teachers, try to find a Spanish-speaking calculus teacher. So the class sizes are smaller. Our emergency rooms are overrun. The report came out this week, as you know, the Census Bureau, that 70% or 63% of people here illegally are on some type of welfare compared to 30% of native-born. The states are the ones that bear the brunt of this. No state can afford to do this.
Well, what do you say to the critics who say that's all an unfair characterization, that people coming here are going to be incarcerated or they're going to be on welfare or that they are going to be a net negative to our society? Let me just read you a couple of critics. Yes. The Guardian saying this: don't blame Jacqueline Call's death on her father. U.S. policies did this. Another one says Jacqueline Call, 7-year-old girl killed by U.S. government's border militarization. And a tweet from Indy Star says the 7-year-old was excited about a new life in the U.S. Maybe she would get her first toy or learn to read. Instead, she died in Border Patrol custody.
The left will always, and the open border crowd will always find one case, as tragic as this is. I've been with you several times, and I talked back in June that there are 25 to 30 million people here illegally, not 11 that the left always talks about. MIT backed me up 3 months later in their report. So we have 25 to 30 million people here illegally. Now, most aren't criminals, but a lot are. And every time I hear people on Fox or whatever station it is talk about, well, these people are law-abiding citizens. In Texas alone, we arrested over 200,000 illegal immigrants, charged them with over 500,000 crimes in a 6-year period. Those are real numbers. We apprehend people from the Middle East. We apprehend people from all over the world. It's not just people coming here from Central America that could be terrorists. We have to have a secure border. The president is right. I hope he holds the line, shuts down the government if we don't build this wall. We cannot absorb the criminals and we cannot absorb the cost. The taxpayers have to pick it up.
Okay, before we're out of time,
Yes.
I want to give you a chance to respond to what
Yes.
Beto said. The accusation that there are sponsors waiting to take care of these kids, so they're not held in these conditions, but this administration is slow walking the process.
I don't know that they're slow walking the process. I think we have to be very careful that we don't release these children to just anyone. Like in Child Protective Services, foster care, we don't just release children to someone because they say they can take them in. We have to be sure that they're not going to be in sex trafficking. We have to be sure they really are a family and loved one member. We know we've apprehended people at the border, I can tell you, that say these are my children, but they're really running sex trafficking. So Beto does not know what he's talking about. He ran an entire campaign in Texas on nothing but, you know, I'm going to bring everybody together and everyone's going to feel good. He came very close to winning. You know, $80 million will do that for you. The most expensive campaign in the history of any senator. He worked hard, but has nothing to say, nothing to add, and he would be a nightmare as if he runs for president.
Well, we're going to talk about how he's polling a little bit later. That's a different discussion, but Lieutenant Governor, thanks for coming in. Good to see you.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Merry Christmas to you, too. Well, a reporter who met with Christopher Steele expresses doubts about the dossier. That story tops a busy night for our Real News Roundup. In an interview with the online news site Mediaite, investigative reporter Michael Isikoff says the infamous, unverified, salacious Steele dossier has not been proven true in several important details. Mediaite also points out there seems to be a preponderance of evidence that President Trump may be able to claim vindication against the allegations that he colluded with Russia in some way, shape, or form. All right, in the pageant once owned by Donald Trump, what ABC calls a major step for the Miss Universe competition, Angela Ponce of Spain is a transgender who walked the runway to great acclaim by media. Ponce didn't win, but NBC says Miss Spain broke barriers for the competition. The popular online room booking site Airbnb claiming an online report is not true, that it's reversed a ban on West Bank listings. Some reports suggest there was a difference in Airbnb statements in Hebrew and English. That's not confirmed. What we do know is that Airbnb is sticking by its ban on accommodations in Israeli settlements in the West Bank. The Weekly Standard publishing its last issue today after shedding writing for years and running afoul of President Trump's populist revolt. Mr. Trump celebrating the Weekly Standard's demise, though many conservatives say they will miss it. And CBS announcing that former CEO Les Moonves will not get his $120 million severance package after the board determined he failed to fully cooperate with an investigation into sexual misconduct allegations. A lawyer for Moonves rejected the decision as baseless, but is not saying whether he will formally challenge it. All right, an early poll of Iowa Democratic voters shows Beto O'Rourke, Joe Biden, and Bernie Sanders leading the pack. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand not too happy about the, quote, lack of diversity. She, too, is rumored to be a 2020 presidential contender. Hear what she has to say. Plus, brand new Fox News polls, how Americans view 2018 as a good year or a bad year. How was it for you? Stay tuned. Tonight's Power Panel is here to weigh in. Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, and Beto O'Rourke are the top Democratic contenders in a new 2020 Iowa poll. The trio besting Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, and 20 other contenders among caucus goers. And one of those potential candidates is worried a lack of diversity could hurt the party in 2020.
I aspire for our country to recognize the beauty of our diversity in some point in the future. And I hope someday we have a woman president. I love the fact that Barack Obama was our president for 8 years. I hope more people of color not only aspire and win the presidency.
Democratic Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. Time now for tonight's Power Panel. Democratic strategist Isaac Wright, Fox News contributor Charlie Hurt, and the Daily Caller White House correspondent Sagar and Jetty. Gentlemen, welcome to all of you.
Thanks, good to be with you. Be here.
Okay, so let me flash up a couple of these polls. The CNN Des Moines Register, top choice for nominees, Biden first, Sanders second, O'Rourke third. Very similar in rural America, Iowa poll. The preference there, Biden, Sanders, and O'Rourke, 1, 2, 3, and again. But this is what I find interesting. Also, the polling was, what do you prefer in a candidate, younger or lifetime of experience? Younger candidate 47%, lifetime of experience 31%, and yet we have Biden and Sanders, Sagar, at the top of these polls.
Yeah, it is interesting.
Confused.
Well, I think what it is that you have all the younger candidates, that there's so many of them that they're splitting each other's vote. So what it really Senator Gillibrand is concerned about there, and what they all are, is that there are just so many potential Democratic candidates. It's like we have 2 or 3 that are said to be announcing in the coming days just this week. So we could have, dozens on our hands, which is going to split a lot of that support.
Yeah, Isaac, we still have quite a ways to go, but but these things now run in 2 to 4 year cycles. How does this field get winnowed down in a way that possibly unites Democrats? Because you hear there from Senator Gillibrand, she's worried that this doesn't look diverse at all with 3 white guys at the top.
We have a wealth of candidates on the Democrat side. If you look at the Democratic primary right now, I think there are 20 in the poll you referenced. There are as many as 22 legitimate candidates right now in the race. We have a wide field of really talented people who represent every aspect of America and are thankful to have a rich bench of talent to pull from for this primary. Republicans are stuck with Donald Trump. They may have a divisive primary on their side, but I'd take those odds any day of the week.
Well, Charlie, what about that? Because Republicans do a really good job of annihilating each other in the primaries. Democrats seem to do less of that, but you've got some really serious people who are like all in now, and a lot of them. Do they rough each other up enough to make a difference in the general?
Oh, I think without a doubt. And of course, let's not forget, so much of the focus last time in 2016 was on the race between Donald Trump and all those Republicans that he ran against. But of course, there was a pretty feisty fight between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, and a lot of, arguably Bernie Sanders had sort of the momentum behind him, the excitement behind him. And
sometimes people forget he won like 21, 22 primary contests.
Yeah.
This was not a blowout by Hillary.
Absolutely. And it went late into the game. And not only that, but we now know, given a lot of the stuff that was going on behind the scenes, that if he had been sort of didn't have so much going against him with the DNC and others trying to help Hillary Clinton, he very well could have gotten the nomination, which of course is ultimately the problem with the thing that Senator Gillibrand talking about, celebrating diversity, which is great and everything. But if you're going to hold out that somehow somebody based on the color of their skin shouldn't be a nominee, that's a real problem. That's the opposite of what Martin Luther King instructed all of us, which is a very good thing, to judge people on the content of their character and not the color of their skin.
Jerry Seib over at the Wall Street Journal says this: the key question is whether the party will find somebody who appeals both to its coastal base, dominated by progressives, upscale college graduates, millennials, and minorities, or choose someone who's more appealing to traditional working and middle-class voters in industrial Midwest states such as Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, all of which helped Democrats reclaim the House in this year's midterm elections. But Sagar, those were the things that helped President Trump sneak up on Hillary Clinton and win.
Yeah, these are some of the most divisive issues that we face. We have people embracing, like Senator Gillibrand, the identity politics that we've seen, which excites the money and the culture, the people who generally have a bigger outsized voice in our media, but it's not necessarily something that is going to excite the people that were lost by the Obama coalition to President Trump. So it's a central concern for any Democrat in this race right now.
Well, and Isaac, how do you feel about this notion that even if Joe Biden ends up to be one of the top frontrunners like he is this early, that there's going to be a serious pull to the left because of the younger, more progressive folks that are running not only in 2020 in the presidential race potentially, but folks that we see on Capitol Hill and this talk of Democrats primarying other Democrats who aren't progressive enough. Do you think there'll be a pull to the left in the primary season for the presidential race?
That's why we have a primary, to determine who's the best candidate, who best represents America and their views. I think you have heartland progressives right from the middle of America, like Governor Bullock from Montana, who are running aggressive primary campaigns that there's a lot of energy behind. I think you have that kind of diversity from every part of the country, every geography, every aspect of the party, every aspect of the country. That's what we need. That's what Democrats have on our side. And it says a lot that Republican talking points right now are all about Republicans trying to debate the Democratic primary in 2 years rather than acknowledge the elephant in the room, which is having Donald Trump as their likely nominee again.
Charlie. Likely nominee. Are we talking to John Kasich sneak attack, or
no? He'll
do you
be
think
there.
He'll get
Kasich, I think Bob Corker is certainly
no, he'll be
about
there.
it. Flake is
Charlie's not having it.
But honestly, the problem is, and you look at someone like Amy Klobuchar, who is a very, very appealing candidate, and I think could give somebody like Donald Trump a real run for his money in those places where Donald Trump won the election. But the problem is, the party has been pulled so far to the left by the base and by some of this talk about socialism and the sanctuary cities and the no borders crowd, that I don't think that an Amy Klobuchar or a sort of more moderate Midwestern type sensibility Democrat can actually get the nomination.
All right, quickly, I want to...
Wait a second. The base of the Democratic Party is pulling it to the left. The base of the Democratic Party is pulling it to say Republicans shouldn't take away millions of Americans' health care, to say that it's wrong for a 7-year-old child to die in our country's
we're not going to relitigate that right
That's
now.
That's not the left. That's the center. Those are American values. Those are the values of the
I think that we all agree that nobody wants to see those things happen.
Not like
but very quickly, because we're out of time, essentially, but I want to get this poll up there, our new Fox News poll. How do you feel about the direction of the country? 51% say hopeful. That's up from 10% last year. Each of you just tell me. We'll start with you, Sagar. How do you feel?
I feel very hopeful for 2019.
You're bullish.
Yeah, very bullish.
Isaac?
I mean, I think it's a good year. I think 2019 will be a good year for Democrats going into 2020. I think the poll said that there were an 11-point drop in people's optimism about their own economic circumstances for a one-year-out period. That's the biggest drop in a Fox News poll of that measement of people's expectation of their future since 2001.
These polls like this are always sort of hit or miss, but the bottom line is that all of the fury that you get out of Washington among the political types, it's not being felt out there in regular America. People are pretty happy right now, and the economy going well.
All right, we shall see. Gentlemen, thank you to our power panel tonight, Charlie, Sagar, and Isaac. All right, still no sign of that missing mother out in Colorado. Authorities wrapping up a search of her fiance's home. So what happens next? We've got the latest on the investigation. And later, shocking new undercover police footage released of an accused ISIS sympathizer plotting a terror attack. We'll show it to you just ahead. This is a Fox News alert. Chicago police say 2 officers have died after being hit by a train while investigating a call about shots being fired. A police spokesman says a weapon was recovered and a person of interest is being questioned on the scene on Chicago's South Side. Breaking news tonight, and shocking undercover video in the case of an alleged ISIS sympathizer accused of plotting attacks on UC Berkeley. Garrett Tenney has the very latest. Hey, Garrett.
Well, Shannon, this suspected terrorist pleaded guilty earlier this year to trying to provide support to ISIS, but today prosecutors accused him of plotting an elaborate scheme that he said would redefine terror.
In online chat rooms, Amir al-Haggagi allegedly said he wanted to kill thousands of people in the name of the Islamic State. And in newly released surveillance video from the FBI, he detailed his plan for a series of attacks in the San Francisco area.
I've been so excited about it. I've been hyped up. Like, how I'm seeing it, I'm seeing that we could get away so easily.
Prosecutors say the 23-year-old's plans included bombing gay bars, lacing cocaine with rat poison and giving it away at nightclubs, and planting explosives inside backpacks on UC Berkeley's campus.
Yeah, I like to kill this thing.
Yeah, they're all just young little Americans who are...
On a drive with an undercover agent he thought was going to help carry out the attacks, al-Haggagi also talked about starting a massive wildfire in the Berkeley Hills.
Yeah, I was thinking about just burning the hills because there's a lot of trees and a lot of homes over there.
Court records show the 23-year-old accessed an ISIS bomb-making manual and applied for a job with the Oakland Police Department in order to steal weapons and explosives. His goal was to launch attacks that had a lasting impact on the West.
I want to make it to the point where every American here thinks twice or 3 times before he leaves his home. Like, is it necessary for me to leave right now? Like, that's how I want it to be.
Al-Haggagi's family claims he's simply a sarcastic young man who likes being provocative, but he is facing up to 47 years in prison, and he's now scheduled to be sentenced early next month. Shannon.
It's always shocking when you actually get to see the video of what the allegations are all about. Garrett, thank you. All right, a 29-year-old mother still missing in Colorado. Did the search of her fiance's house reveal any new clues for authorities? Well, we're going to take you there after the break. Colorado police say they found no sign of missing 29-year-old mother Kelsey Barrett's body on her fiance's property. Alicia Acuna looks at where the investigation goes from here. Alicia?
Good evening, Shannon. Woodland Park police are only telling us that they had 75 people out there from multiple jurisdictions searching that 35-acre property and home that belongs to Kelsey Barrett's fiance, Patrick Frazee. Search and rescue, the FBI and members of the district attorney's office helped. They used a backhoe and removed at least 1 vehicle. Investigators say her disappearance on Thanksgiving is suspicious, and they do not believe she is out there intentionally avoiding efforts to find her. The last person police say to see her face-to-face is Patrick Frazee. His attorney released a statement saying, quote, "We understand that a search warrant was executed on Mr. Frazee's property. Mr. Frazee was never asked to voluntarily participate in this search." His attorney insists his client is cooperating, providing a DNA sample, his cell phone, and photos. But Frazee has not given them an interview. The Woodland Park police chief says they want to sit down, but at this point he is only communicating with them through his attorney.
There have been numerous questions about whether Patrick is a suspect or a person of interest. At this point, we are considering every possibility, and I'm not willing to jump to conclusions or label people involved in this highly complex investigation.
Other than Frazee, police say this video shows the last public sighting of Kelsey Barrett at a Safeway grocery store near her home with her 1-year-old daughter on Thanksgiving Day. A $25,000 reward is now being offered in this case. Shannon?
Alicia, thank you very much. Well, Saturday was graduation day at Middle Tennessee State University, and one of the graduates says the day was, quote, like a dream. Jay Strabino, an Army veteran, survived being shot 13 times at close range while he was serving in Iraq in 2006. Now, after a lengthy rehab, Strabino, with the help of a veterans group, enrolled at Middle Tennessee State. He graduated Saturday with a degree in exercise science and a minor in biology. He says, "The sky isn't the limit." He says there's actually no limit. So Jay Strabino, it's not only you, because you are our top Midnight hero, but that veterans group, your teachers, your family, everyone else who helped you get that degree, you're all tonight our Midnight heroes. You've inspired us. Well, most watched, most trusted, and most grateful you spent your evening with us. Good night from Washington. I'm Shannon Bream. Stick around for Tucker.